The afternoon sun filtered through the thick canopy of pine and oak trees, casting long shadows across the familiar forest path. Jake Mitchell walked quickly along the dirt trail, his backpack bouncing slightly with each hurried step. As the son of the local forest ranger, he had walked these paths countless times, but today felt different. Today, he was racing against time. His father, Ranger Tom Mitchell, had been called away on an emergency. A wildfire had started 30 miles north, and every available ranger was needed to help with the evacuation efforts. Jake's mother worked late shifts at the hospital, which meant he would be alone at the ranger station tonight. The responsibility felt heavy on his 17-year-old shoulders, but he was determined not to let his father down. The forest around him was unusually quiet. Even the birds seemed to sense something in the air. Jake pulled his jacket tighter as a cool breeze rustled through the leaves above. October was settling into the mountains of Colorado, bringing with it the crisp promise of winter. The familiar sense of pine needles and damp earth filled his nostrils as he quickened his pace. He had spent the day in town, picking up supplies and checking on elderly residents who lived in the more remote areas. It was part of his unofficial duties as the ranger's son. People in these mountain communities looked out for each other, especially when danger threatened. The wildfire was still far away, but everyone knew how quickly things could change in the dry autumn air. As Jake rounded a bend in the trail, something caught his eye. Through the trees, he could see a flash of bright color that didn't belong in the natural palette of browns and greens. He stopped walking and listened carefully. The forest was still eerily quiet, but now he could hear something else. A soft sound, almost like crying. His heart began to beat faster. In all his years of walking these trails, he had never encountered anything truly dangerous. Bears and mountain lions were rare in this area, and most people knew better than to wander alone into the deep woods. But the sound was definitely human, and it was coming from just ahead. Jake left the main trail and pushed through a cluster of young aspens. The crying grew louder, and then he saw her. A woman, probably in her 30s, was tied to a large pine tree. Her expensive-looking coat was torn, and her dark hair was disheveled. She looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes. "Please," she said, her voice hoarse. "Please help me." Jake immediately dropped his backpack and rushed to her side. His hands shook slightly as he worked to untie the rough rope that bound her wrists. "Are you hurt?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm and steady. "What happened to you?" The woman flexed her fingers as the ropes fell away, wincing as circulation returned to her hands. "I'm okay," she said quietly. "Just cold and scared. My name is Victoria Ashford." Jake had heard that name before. The Ashfords owned several luxury resorts in the area, including the Grand Mountain Lodge that attracted wealthy tourists from Denver and beyond. He helped Victoria to her feet, noticing how she favored her right ankle. "Can you walk?" Jake asked, offering his arm for support. Victoria took a tentative step and grimaced. "I think I twisted it when this happened." She looked around nervously, as if expecting someone to emerge from the trees at any moment. Jake guided her to a fallen log where she could sit down. He retrieved a water bottle from his backpack and offered it to her. "Who did this to you?" he asked gently. "And why?" Victoria drank deeply before answering. Her hands were still trembling, but she seemed to be regaining her composure. "It's complicated," she said finally. "I suppose you think I'm just another rich person who got in over her head." Jake shook his head. "I don't think anything yet. I just want to help you get somewhere safe." Something in his tone seemed to reassure her. Victoria looked at him more carefully, taking in his worn flannel shirt and practical hiking boots. "You're local," she said. "It wasn't a question." "My father is the forest ranger for this area," Jake replied. "I grew up here." Victoria nodded slowly. Then, maybe you'll understand. She was quiet for a long moment, gathering her thoughts. 3 months ago, my husband died in a car accident. Richard was involved in some business dealings that weren't entirely legal. After the funeral, I started getting threats. People wanted money they claimed he owed them. Jake listened without interruption, his mind racing. This was far more serious than he had initially thought. I hired security, changed my phone number, even considered leaving Colorado entirely, Victoria continued. But then I found out something that changed everything. Richard had been secretly donating money to environmental protection groups. Large amounts of money. He was trying to preserve this forest from development. Development? Jake asked, confused. Victoria met his eyes. There's a company that wants to clear-cut this entire area and build a shopping complex. Richard had been quietly buying up land to prevent it from happening. When he died, the threats weren't just about money. They were about stopping his conservation work. Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. His father had mentioned concerns about developers, but he hadn't realized how serious the situation had become. Today, 2 men approached me at my hotel, Victoria said, her voice growing stronger. They offered me a choice: sign over the land rights or face consequences. When I refused, they brought me out here. They said it would give me time to think about my decision. Where are they now? Jake asked, looking around warily. They left about an hour ago. Said they'd be back before dark for my answer. Victoria checked her expensive watch. That gives us maybe 90 minutes. Jake stood up quickly. Then we need to get you out of here, right now. He helped Victoria to her feet, but she stumbled on her injured ankle. I can't walk far on this, she said, frustrated. Maybe you should go get help and come back for me. Jake shook his head firmly. I'm not leaving you here alone. He thought for a moment, then smiled. But I have an idea. There's an old ranger cabin about a quarter-mile from here. It has a radio, and it's hidden well enough that those men probably don't know about it. Supporting Victoria's weight, Jake led her slowly through the trees. The cabin was exactly where he remembered it, tucked away in a small clearing and almost invisible beneath years of ivy growth. Inside, the old radio equipment still worked, maintained by his father for emergencies exactly like this one. Within minutes, Jake had contacted the sheriff's department and his father. Help was on the way. As they waited, Victoria sat quietly by the small window, watching the forest. You know, she said finally, I came out here planning to give up, to sign those papers and walk away. Richard's death, the threats, the loneliness, it all seemed like too much. Jake sat down across from her. What changed your mind? Victoria smiled, and for the first time since he had found her, she looked genuinely peaceful. Meeting you, seeing that there are still people who care about this place, who would risk their own safety to help a stranger. She gestured toward the window. Richard loved this forest. He used to say it represented everything good about the world. Now I understand what he meant. The sound of helicopter blades in the distance interrupted their conversation. Through the window, Jake could see the sheriff's helicopter approaching the clearing. Victoria, Jake said as they prepared to leave the cabin. What will you do now? She looked at him with determination in her eyes. I'm going to fight. For Richard's memory, for this forest, and for people like you who call it home. She paused. Sometimes it takes getting lost to remember who you really are. As the helicopter landed and officers emerged to escort them to safety, Jake realized that this day had changed something in him too. He had always loved the forest, but now he understood that loving something meant being willing to protect it. Later that evening, as he sat with his father at the ranger station, Jake learned that Victoria's attackers had been arrested. More importantly, her story had attracted media attention that would make it much harder for the development company to continue